Kansas has to win this game. They have to end 16 straight. We preview Kansas versus Kansas State on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we are previewing the game. Kansas State. What is the Wildcats scouting report? What are our matchups of the game that could determine who comes out on top? We'll get into a little of our storylines and news of the game as well on today's episode of the show. And this episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That could come in handy for the KUK State game. So we're going to start with the top storylines of the game, the game preview, and then we'll get into the Kansas State scouting report and then finish up with matchups of the game on today's episode. We'll have more content coming at you today as well with Big 12 Media Days, but this is obviously a big one. Kansas has lost 16 consecutive games in the series to Kansas State. This is not pretty. They need it to end. Just in terms of the legacy of Lance Leipold and Jalon Daniels, just in terms of the, if you want to continue to have recruiting classes like you have built in the class of 2026 in state, it would be very helpful to win this game and beat one of your rivals, for the first time. It's time for that to kind of happen for KU. And when you think about the 16 straight too, some of the ones that certainly come to mind in terms of the most excruciating, I guess you could say, would be one way of putting it, or another way of putting it would probably be like, which ones has Kansas been the closest to, pulling the upset? Obviously, this is a little different situation because you're actually favored in this one. And that's kind of a storyline in this one too, that, Kansas is the team that's lost the 16 straight, but it's actually the team who's won the 16 straight that gets to play the chip on their shoulder, the underdog card coming into this game, which is a very uncomfortable place to be if you are Kansas. But you think back last year, Kansas almost went into Manhattan and beat Kansas State. That was, at the time, they were ranked 16th in the country. Kansas ends up losing 29-27. They hit like a 50-yard field goal. Jalon Daniels hit the fumble, and from there you lose the game, in a game you felt like you very easily could have won. Year before that, you lose 31-27 to then 21st ranked Kansas State, and that would have been the difference of that Kansas team winning 10 games, which is certainly even more unfortunate. You think of the Rich Miller dropped interception, you think of the Trevor Wilson dropped fumble. Then you go back the year before, you lose 47-27 to, at that time, 12th ranked Kansas State. And honestly, that's a game that the score was not indicative of how, Kansas had avenues to making that a closer game. If I remember right, they muffed a punt or a kickoff or something. Shoot, they had the step out on the kickoff last year too, at the 1 yard line. But you sense a theme here as we go through these. It's not just the 16 straight losses. It's that Kansas consistently is self-inflicting harm. They're self-inflicting mistakes, special teams advantages for Kansas State, just boneheaded plays, gaffes by Kansas. That has been the difference in a lot of ways. Some blowout wins for Kansas State the three previous times, 35-10, 55-14, and 38-10. The time before that was the one in Manhattan in 2018 when Kansas lost 21-17. And that was the game where Kansas nearly stole one in Manhattan. They're driving down by 4 in the last couple minutes of the game, and Peyton Bender just drops the ball and fumbles, and that did it in for Kansas, and ended up losing by 4 in a game you could have won there. You lose 30-20 the year before. This was 2017 in Lawrence, and that was a game where I want to say Kansas State it was either a punt return or a kick return for a touchdown, so that's a touchdown difference there. And then also, even with them already, and I think they had another long return in the game too, with them already having all the special teams accolades, you scored it was a pretty good game for Carter Stanley. You scored a touchdown or kicked a field goal or something to make it 27-20 in the last couple of minutes of the game, where it was hey, if you kick off to them and you make a stop and then you get the ball back, maybe you can go down, force overtime, or go for 2, or do something crazy, pull the upset here. And Kansas kicked it off to the same guy who had been killing them in return games. He takes it to the plus 40. Kansas got a stop, but they were still in field goal range, and they made a field goal and ended up winning by 10. So it's things like that. 2016, Kansas State won 34-19. That was kind of a closer game. KU kind of hung in there. And then prior to that, all the ones before that are pretty much blowouts, except for 2009, in which Kansas State went 17-10, which is the outskirt of the 16 straight. Prior to that, Kansas had won 3 in a row. They blew out Kansas State 52-21. That was the Jake Sharp game, went for 1 billion touchdowns. They won 30-24 in Manhattan in 07, and then in 06 they won 39-20. They had also won 4 of 5, and that was after Kansas State had another long streak of their own. Overall, Kansas owns the overall series record, but that is quickly closing, to say the least. Now, I think beyond just the actual rivalry aspect, which is obviously the most important aspect of this, there's another conversation in this one of like, this is going to have a big impact in which of these teams makes it to a bowl game. I mean, it's still possible that both teams end up making it to a bowl game after this one, or that neither makes it to a bowl game after this one, or that, whoever wins doesn't make it and the loser does make it. Like, that stuff can clearly happen. But what I find interesting is that this one, to me, is going to have a heavy implication on if either team does go bowling in the end. Because think about it, if Kansas State loses this football game, they're sitting at 3-5. Your margin for error for making a bowl game is much lower and becomes much, much more difficult if you're the Wildcats. From a Kansas perspective, you'd be sitting at 4-4, which would be the same record as Kansas State if they won this game, but it would feel like Kansas State is ascending. They just beat TCU. They had a close loss to Baylor that they easily could have won. It feels like they're heading in the right direction. Whereas with Kansas, it would feel like the opposite way. And with Kansas, you look at the back half of the schedule. If you don't beat Kansas State, can you find 2 gimme wins? I don't think you can on the schedule. Now, they can beat Utah. They can win at Arizona. They can win these games. But it's not a gimme. It's a lot of games you would be, favor or underdogs by kind of a coin flip there, right? And that's kind of a scary spot to be when you would have to win one of those games. So going bowling is actually kind of huge as a result of this game. And then the last storyline here is both teams are coming off a bye week. Kansas has been really good under Lance Leipold coming off a bye week, 6-1 both against the spread and overall off a bye week since 2022, right? Not counting 2021 when Kansas was just at their worst, and that was really year 0 for Lance Leipold when they took over anyway. When you look at Kansas State, they have been closer to 500. I think since 2022, they're 4-3 off the bye. I want to say they're only 2-5 against the spread off the bye under Chris Kleiman since 2022. I could be off on that exact number, but point being, Kansas has handled the bye better. As much as as that on paper is an advantage for Kansas, there also, though, in the back of my head is this idea of Kansas has so many bells and whistles on offense and what they do defensively, schematically, offensively, all the formations, all the motions, all the packages they run. Is both teams having a bye actually a net positive for the other team, knowing how long it usually takes to get prepared for Kansas, that for KU, that makes things more difficult? Who knows? Or maybe it allows KU to add even more wrinkles. And for Kansas State defense, that, the defensive line hasn't been great, but they've still had a pretty good sack rate. That tells me that they're scheming some stuff up. Maybe it allows Kansas to scheme some stuff up. Maybe it allows Kansas, off their worst offensive line game since in 5 years against Texas Tech, to kind of fix some of that stuff. So there are some things you could kind of look at both ways. Now, the only bit of news really we have coming into this, normally we record these for Thursday, and we have the Wednesday injury report. This is coming out Wednesday morning, so we don't have the injury report just yet. We don't know some of the statuses of some of these players. The big one to kind of keep an eye on is for Kansas State. It's Dylan Edwards, their running back, a very explosive runner. And when you look at Kansas State's running game, they're a team that gets stuffed a good amount running the ball, but they hit a lot of explosive plays to counterbalance that. If Dylan Edwards can't go, that's one less explosive piece for them. And Chris Kleiman mentioned earlier in this week on his Monday press conference, he kind of implied that right now he sounds like he would be on the wrong end of questionable. He would be more doubtful right now. Could that just be a early week gamesmanship? Would not shock me. And then all of a sudden we see him at questionable on Wednesday, and then he plays on Saturday. I still feel like I'm not going to rule out him playing at all, but that is at least something to keep in mind. From the Daniel Highshaw perspective, Lance Leipold mentioned on Monday, he said, we're not as healthy as we'd like to be yet as a team, but he did mention Highshaw trending in a good direction, ended up getting more carries than the thought he was going to be able to their last game, and then they get a bye week in between. Can he add another element by being fully healthy and fresh after a couple weeks off to the running game that they've been kind of missing? So let's move on to the Kansas State scouting report, then get into matchups of the game. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat all the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how we craft every model. You can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost any season. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. This episode is also brought to you by Peloton. Peloton's shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus. Powered by Peloton IQ, it's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach that peak performance. And the personalized class recommendations keep you engaged. You get workouts tailored to your vibe and energy level each week. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll have another episode with Christian Rao, another crossover, talking more on the KU K-State game. We're going to have our KU keys to the game later in the week. We got KU basketball content with KU Louisville preview coming out. We're going to have some KU Big 12 Media Day content coming out on Wednesday as well. So plenty coming at you. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast. All right, opponent scouting report for the Kansas State Wildcats. They come in at 3-4 on the season, 2-2 in Big 12 play. It was a horrible opening for K-State. They lose a close game to Iowa State and Ireland, and then they just didn't rebound. They nearly lost to North Dakota. They lost at home to Army, and they're sitting at 1-3 on the season. But now they've kind of figured it out. They've won 2 of 3 games. They beat UCF by 14 in a game that honestly wasn't that close. It was close. It was like a 20-point lead for them in the fourth quarter. And then they lost by 1 at Baylor in kind of a controversial back and forth result game. And then they kind of beat up a pretty solid TCU team, 41-28 headed into their bye. It feels like they're kind of back to being where they were. Now, the overall record's not going to indicate, by the end of the season for them that they were where they were expected to be. But if you're just looking at a vacuum, how they're playing right now, it is much closer to the preseason expectation, which makes this game a little more dangerous. Obviously, their head coach, Chris Kleiman, and he's been there a bit now for Kansas State. Like, this is an important game for him. I mean, I don't think he's a hot seat. He's made bowl games every year. They've won 8 or 9 games. It hasn't been the breakthrough year that they're looking for. I guess they did win the Big 12, one of the years, but it definitely feels like the expectations have been pretty high. But does the hot seat talk get ramped up if they lose this game? You'd be sitting to 3-5, your first loss to Kansas, the in-state recruiting stuff. I don't think you would get fired, but I don't know, it at least becomes more of a conversation that leads into, okay, is 2026 a make or break year at that point, would be my assumption. Now you look at it coming into the year, they were picked at the top or near the top of the Big 12, and now they're scrambling to make a bowl game. But the fact that they still have enough pedigree, that there's still enough talent there, it scares you a bit playing them where they can play the underdog card in a series where they've been the ones who won 16 straight. But on ESPN FPI, they're ranked 40th. Kansas is 37th there, so very close game. On ESPN SP Plus, K-State is 53rd. Kansas is 41st. And you look at the splits there, K-State 49 on offense, 51 on defense, 32 on special teams. On SP Plus, Kansas is 5th on offense. That's pretty cool. 94th on defense. That's not very cool. And how about this? 11th on special teams. And then also, if you look at ESPN FPI's team efficiencies, Kansas State is 55th overall. Kansas is in at 31st. The player personnel for Kansas State, quarterbacks Avery Johnson. We'll get into more on him, but kind of the rub is it shows a lot of flashes, can hit some highlight plays, good runner, has a lower completion rate and yard per attempt number though. Running back is, again, going to be interesting. Is Dylan Edwards out or not? If not, Joe Jackson coming off a good game. Overall, he's been fine this year. Jace Brown's good. Jerron Tibbs has been a good transfer addition at receiver for them. And then Garrett Oakley has been really good as a tight end receiver. Not the deepest or best receiving core that KU will face this season, but those guys specifically, all players to kind of watch for them. Their offensive line is 41st on Pro Football Focus in pass blocking grade, 51st in run blocking grade. So kind of above average, but not stellar in either category. The defensive line only ranks 104th in pass rush grade on Pro Football Focus. But again, they're 25th in the country sack rate. What does that tell you? It tells me that it's either an error by Pro Football Focus, which is very possible, or that they're having to bring a lot of blitzes, and they do well with them bringing exotic pressures, blitzing. And that's kind of my assumption. If you think about it from a standpoint of like you're running a 3-down looks, that allows you to bring guys from all over the field that the defense might not see. So it might just be a really good job by the defensive coordinator and disguising blitzes and some of the linebackers and DBs blitzing, that they're getting untouched lanes to, the quarterback, where PFF isn't giving them a pass rush win because he didn't get blocked, but it's leading to a higher sack rate. So overall, they are getting good pressure. I will say this: if they are getting a lot of that pressure from blitzes specifically, good news for Kansas, Jalon Daniels is 9.7 yards per attempt this year when blitzed. That's actually higher than his number when he's not blitzed, 9.2 yards per attempt. Also, when Jalon Daniels is blitzed this year, 9 touchdowns compared to 0 interceptions. Now you look at the rest of the K-State defense, linebacker is a strength for them. Austin Romaine is one of the best linebackers in the country. Secondary's been fine so far. They're 60th rated in the country in coverage grade, so kind of average there. But if they do have a lack of pass rush, that actually becomes more impressive. They do have a lot of good safeties. I think maybe the question's more at the corner spot for them, but do have some interesting safeties there. And then the kicker has been very good for them. This is a really good kicker matchup between the two teams. The quarterback deep dive here, Avery Johnson, really good touchdown to interception ratio. If you count his rushing scores, he's got 16 total touchdowns compared to just 2 interceptions. But it's interesting because if you look at his turnover worthy throw rate, it's actually like double of what Jalon Daniels is. So I don't know if there's something there, but I think, I don't know, it's interesting. Only 7.0 yards per attempt for Avery Johnson. That's a low number. That's actually down from the 7.3 it was last year. The 7.0 yards per attempt for Avery Johnson, that only ranks 89th in the country. And the completion percentage being at 62.8%, that ranks 84th in the country. Total QBR, he's 62nd nationally, so a little bit better there. But all those would say more of just kind of an average quarterback, at least passing the football. Obviously, he does have the threat to run, and that's what kind of scares me most in this game, and he's not turning the ball over. But 1,100 career rushing yards. I know there have been some in Kansas State that are confused why he's not running the football even more, and he has really good numbers doing that. I'll say this: I can't help but think they've been saving some bullets for the back half of the season, and for this game included in that. He has 3 straight games with double-digit carries, including over 70 rushing yards against UCF and Baylor. I'm expecting him to run the ball 14, 15, maybe even 20 times in this game. So I do think that'll be more on the docket this game. But I will say, too, like something else that kind of scares me is Johnson's a bit reminiscent of Brendan Sorsby at Cincinnati in terms of where he wants to throw the ball. 49% of his pass attempts come over the middle third of the field. That was a little less than Sorsby at Cincinnati, but that certainly hurt Kansas. He's also done really well on play action, 10 yards per attempt on 66% on play action compared to non-play action, where he's only at 5.6 yards per attempt and 61%. So KU getting into downs that kind of eliminate your players and linebackers thinking that it could be play action, getting them into pass first downs where you don't have to worry about that is going to be really important. They also throw a lot of short passes. 59% of Avery Johnson's passes come within 9 yards or less of the line of scrimmage. And I should also say he's also down over a full yard per attempt when blitzed, and has thrown interceptions, both his interceptions when he is being blitzed. So a little bit opposite there in terms of Jalon being really good against the blitz. Avery Johnson hasn't been as good against the blitz. Key stats in this one, 5 happy stats for K-State. They have the 3rd lowest completion percentage allowed defensively in the Big 12. So they've done a really good job eliminating, easy throws for the defense. Number 1 in the Big 12 in yards per kick return, and they have a kick return touchdown. You think of K-State and special teams, that's certainly the case here. Number 1 in the Big 12 with 7 fumble recoveries. Kansas has to hold on to the football. You know what's really weird, though? If you look at, I don't even know how this is possible. Kansas State is only 9th in the Big 12 in forced fumbles. They've forced 4, but they've recovered 7. So I don't know if that accounts for, like, do muffed punts not count as a forced fumble? I guess that would make sense. Or, like, if somebody just drops the ball or whatever, like, I don't know, an unforced fumble. So that, to me, honestly, seems like K-State's been a little lucky with the fumble luck, with the fumble recovery luck, that they've only forced 4 and they've recovered 7. But at the same time I say that, you think of all the bad breaks that have gone KU's way, or, in some of the cases, KU has made their own bad breaks, and K-State has made their own good breaks in some of the recent games. And that scares me, that stat, that like, could that be something that comes into play, that they've done well this year, even if it is a bit lucky? It feels like those are the plays that go K-State's way in this matchup. They're also third in the Big 12 in points allowed per red zone trip defensively. KU's only 14th on the flip side, so their defense has done good walling up in the red zone, and they're 80th percentile nationally in explosive play rate offensively. So they get a lot of explosive plays offensively. Now, sad stats for the K-State team. They are 13th of the 16 Big 12 teams in points allowed per game at 27. What's interesting there, Kansas has scored exactly 27 points, exactly on the dot, the last 3 meetings with Kansas State. Obviously, it was never enough. So can you get to 30 plus in this game? Because the last time Kansas scored 30 plus in a game against Kansas State, it was the last time they beat Kansas State, which was 52-21 on November 1st, 2008. And again, you go back to the 2007 meeting, you won 30-24. So back-to-back 30-point games, you won both those games. You look at last year, if you would have scored 30 points, you would have won the game. Can Kansas get to 30? Also, other sad stats for K-State. 13th in the Big 12 in yards per attempt passing, and 46th percentile nationally, so about average in yards per dropback. They're also 12th in the Big 12 in third down conversion rate defensively, so they've struggled a bit getting off the field, kind of similar to Kansas. 6th percentile nationally, so that means 94% of college football is better than them in the amount of runs that are stuffed offensively, meaning they're getting a lot of their runs stuffed when Kansas State runs the ball. They're only 14th percentile in offensive line run push. That means their offensive line isn't getting a huge block, and they are getting a lot of plays stuffed, even though they are getting explosives. And then on the defensive side, even though their offense gets a lot of explosive plays, their defense gives up a lot of explosive plays. They're 4th percentile nationally in explosive play rate defensively. That means that 96% of college football is better at limiting explosive plays than the Kansas State defense. Can Kansas take advantage of those? We'll find out. Let's get to our matchups of the game next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for joining us. This episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. College football's here, and I don't know how you couldn't be more excited about each and every Saturday, the tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands. Actually getting tickets, though, sometimes it can be a bit of a battle itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, price jumps at checkouts. That's why I use Game Time. It's the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see? It's what you pay. You can even see the picture of your seat from the game. Like if you haven't been to the new booth yet and you're like, oh, what does this seat view look like? Well, you can pull up the Game Time app. You can see exactly what the seat view looks like on the app. It makes it so that you're not getting surprised at checkout or when you show up to the stadium. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, promo code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show and get into the matchups of the game for KU and K-State. First down, play clean football and close out the game. So Kansas State's tied 8th nationally in turnovers forced. Can you hold on to the football? Can you avoid those back-breaking turnovers? Can you play clean football? Because you think about a lot of these past losses to Kansas State, it involves you not playing clean football. It involves you making a mistake. It involves you muffing a punt or doing something stupid. The Wildcats are also 2nd in the Big 12 in the least amount of penalty yards per game. They're not going to beat themselves. We've seen that over and over again in this series. They're not going to beat themselves. Kansas beats themselves. Play clean football in this game. And obviously special teams is a big part of that. Play clean on special teams because we've seen that swing a lot of these games in favor of Kansas State. Beyond that, can you close out the game? Heck, can you close out each half? Because if this is going to be another close game, you think about the last couple of years, K-State, winning the fourth quarter a couple of years ago. K-State winning the end of game situation last year. Can you close out the games for Kansas? That hasn't just been a KU K-State issue. KU struggled closing out halves in a lot of these games. Now, maybe it changed with the UCF game. They did close out the half well against Texas Tech. So maybe they're trending in the right direction there. But certainly that'll be, of note in this game against Kansas State. Second down, limiting explosive run plays against K-State. The KU defense is just 30th percentile at limiting explosive run plays. So that's not very good. And Kansas State is in the 87th percentile offensively in explosive run rate. So you have a Kansas State team that's good at getting explosive runs. You have a Kansas team that's bad at stopping explosive runs. That is a little bit scary of a matchup. But if you can limit them in this game, and again, the Dylan Edwards health is huge for this because it becomes a little bit easier if you don't have to do that. But it's not just him too. Like, it's also about stopping the explosive runs of Avery Johnson. That's going to be important for KU. And I think it's been kind of a hit or miss start for KU defending rushing quarterbacks. Like, you did pretty good with it against Bo Pribula. Actually, you did very good with it against Bo Pribula, but also against the West Virginia backups. Then again, it's the backups. It's late in the game. I don't know, but they were able to run the ball. You look at what Texas Tech did in the second half. Quarterbacks were able to run the ball. I don't know what it'll be against Avery Johnson. That'll be interesting to see. But if they can limit the explosives, if they can limit that, if they can limit the QB runs, Kansas is 72nd percentile with stuff rate against the run defensively. So they actually do a good job of stuffing runs. It's just like, okay, we're going to get a 0-yard run. We're going to get a TFL. They lost a yard. And then it's like the third run they have is like, oh, that's a 30-yard run. It's like, can you limit the explosives? Because the other stuff, when you're not giving up the explosive, is actually pretty good. So K-State's defense also profiles as one that gives up a lot of explosives, as we talked about earlier, which I think makes it even more important because if the KU defense can limit the explosive runs, there's a chance KU is going to get a good amount of explosives from their offense. And if you can have a heavy advantage in the explosive plays, that'd be huge and favorable to you winning the game. Third down is an offensive line resurgence for KU. You allowed over 30 pressures in the Texas Tech game. You allowed 9 sacks. You get your will, your pride tested a little bit in a game like that. Now, I will say, the KU defense, that was a little bit of KU's offensive line played bad. Texas Tech's defensive line is very good and played a good game. And kind of the confluence of everything led to that because you look at the games leading up, Kansas given up a little over 40 pressures on the season before the Texas Tech game. You give up over 30 to Texas Tech alone. So you nearly doubled the amount of pressures you've given up this season in that one game. You allowed more sacks in that one game than you had allowed all season long combined. So it's not the norm for the KU offensive line to play that bad. In fact, they've been, relatively fine for most of the season. You need to at least get back to that against Kansas State. And I don't think they have the same dudes that Tech did on the defensive line, but they're certainly going to be chomping at the bit. They're certainly going to feel confident coming into this game after how that one went. So can you get back to at least where you were in some of the other games? They get pressure with some exotic looks. This is one physically that I do think Kansas is better equipped to hold up physically, but how are you going to hold up mentally? Like maybe that's where the bye week kind of comes in and helps KU. But also, if we're talking about the offensive line, can you get the running game going? Because in KU's 2 biggest games, Missouri and Texas Tech, nada basically from the running game. You haven't been able to run the ball at all. So can you find that a little bit too against Kansas State? And then fourth down is Kansas on early downs. Kansas State is just 37th percentile defensively in early downs EPA per play. That means that they're giving up too many yards on the early downs defensively. KU offense is in the 88th percentile on early downs. So KU, even though they haven't been the best third down team, they've been really good on first and second downs, on early downs so far this season. And so when you combine that Kansas has been good on early downs, the K-State defense has struggled on early downs. When you combine that with the giant explosive play rate that the K-State defense is allowing, when you combine that with the good explosive, plays that we've seen Kansas have at times this year, you think some of the ones like Emmanuel Henderson or so on and so forth, I can't help but wonder, is this going to be a game where KU unleashes throwing the football on early downs even more? They've actually done it a pretty good amount this season, but is it like an overwhelming amount because they feel like that's where they can have their best shot and really avoid some of those more exotic looks that K-State wants to dial up if it's third and long, where they want to send some of these blitzes? Like, could that be something where KU just says, let's just not even get to that point. Let's just try to strike early and often and try to have success there. I think there's going to be a lot of throws from Jalon Daniels on early downs in this game. And can you have success doing that? All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And we'll be back for some Big 12 media content. We'll have more KU K-State content, KU Louisville content, plenty coming at you all week long. So make sure you're subscribed anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page.